Hi, in this tutorial we demonstrate how to get started with Minikube on our workstation. Before we get started with Minikube, we need to install the recommended isolation software based on our workstation's operating system and its architecture. For Linux distributions, Windows and Mac OS on Intel 86 processor, we encourage you to download and install the latest release of the Oracle VirtualBox hypervisor. For macOS workstations on Apple Silicon ARM processors labeled M1, M2, and M3, we encourage you to download and install the latest release of Docker Desktop, selecting the appropriate package for your architecture. This demo is recorded on an Ubuntu 2204 LTS workstation, where the latest VirtualBox for Linux has been installed as well. We strongly encourage Minikube to be installed from its official documentation. So let's navigate to the Get Started page, scroll down to Installation, and select the operating system, its architecture, the stable release, and then the binary download installer type. Other installations are available for Mac, for both x86, the Intel chipset, and the ARM 64. Those would be the M1, M2, M3 workstations, stable binary download. And then for Windows, again, we would need to choose the stable exe download installer type. Now let's download and install the binary. Select one command, navigate to your terminal, and in the terminal we run the first command to download the package. And then from the browser window, select the second command, return to your terminal, run the second command, and now we have Minikube installed. Before proceeding, let's check the Minikube version. That would be the Minikube version command. Version 132.0 was installed. Now we are ready to run the Minikube start command, but we want to make sure that the driver selected by Minikube will be VirtualBox. And this is a command that was presented earlier in the chapter that will provision and bootstrap a single node Kubernetes cluster on VirtualBox, allowing the Minikube tool to use the default configuration options for the number of nodes, that'll be 1, the size of the Minikube VirtualBox VM, the Minikube cluster container runtime, and then the container network interface. The recording was paused for a few minutes, but now that we've returned, we see that the Minikube installation has completed. If you are following along on a Mac labeled M1, M2, or M3, make sure to install the Docker Desktop for your architecture and start Minikube with the Docker driver as presented in the lecture section. Now let's check the status of the cluster by running the Minikube status command. This shows the Minikube cluster running, the control plane, the host, and the kubelet node agent. And for now, we can stop the Minikube cluster just stopping the Minikube VM, but preserves all of our configuration and all of our work. And we can run the Minikube status command once again to check that everything has stopped. And for validation, we can easily check the Oracle VM VirtualBox Manager, where we have a Minikube virtual machine created by the Minikube tool. Now let's explore the Minikube profiles and some advanced cluster start options. So let's run the Minikube profiles list command. And this command displays the only Minikube cluster that we have, the one running on VirtualBox. Has installed a Docker runtime for our containerized applications, has an IP address, a version 128.3, and the status of the cluster that is stopped. But what if I want to provision a different cluster of a different size, with a different driver, and possibly a different runtime? For that, we need to run Minikube start with several other configuration options. Now this command will start Minikube with the Docker driver instead. It will create a cluster of 2 nodes. The container runtime will be Cryo instead of Docker as it was originally selected. And the Kubernetes version we want is 1.27.12. And this time we have to supply the profile name, the name of the cluster. So that will be Minidoc for this installation. The recording was paused for a few minutes, but now that the cluster has been bootstrapped, let's list the profiles once again. So that will be the Minikube profile list command. And this time we see 2 clusters. We see the Minikube, the original cluster, on VirtualBox, and then the Minidoc, the second cluster, using Docker as a driver, installed Cryo as the container runtime for our containerized applications, runs the desired Kubernetes version, and it is in a running state. The active marker is still set on the Minikube default cluster, and it represents the current context of the Minikube command. Now the active context can be switched to a different cluster profile from the list within the Minikube profile command. That is Minikube profile, followed by the name of the new profile. Let's make it Minidoc. The Minikube profile was successfully set to the Minidoc cluster. Let's validate this again by listing profiles. And we see the active marker is now set on the Minidoc cluster. So all Minikube commands would now target this particular cluster. While the default Minikube cluster can be validated by inspecting the VirtualBox management panel, we see the Minikube virtual machine that is powered off. For the Minidoc cluster, we need to check with Docker to see that these nodes are actually running. So we can achieve that by running sudo docker ps. So it shows two different Docker containers, one named Minidoc M02 and the other one named Minidoc. So Minidoc is my control plane of the second cluster, and then Minidoc M02 would be my worker node. Now let's remove the two clusters, the default Minikube and Minidoc. So to delete the default Minikube cluster, it's sufficient to run Minikube delete. Well, since we switched the marker to the Minidoc cluster, now Minidoc was implicitly deleted. But in order to delete the Minikube default cluster, we need to explicitly specify its name, Minikube or default. So Minidoc was deleted in Docker, while Minikube was deleted in VirtualBox. Checking containers again shows no running Docker containers. And the Oracle VirtualBox VM Manager shows no virtual machines. So the Minikube virtual machine has been deleted. So now that we successfully cleaned up the environment, let's create a new cluster, a default Minikube cluster, this time on multiple nodes and with a custom runtime, where the size of the cluster should be carefully planned according to the workstation's hardware capacity. Now, we may recommend a larger 3-node cluster, but if needed, a smaller cluster with fewer nodes can be created instead with 2 nodes or even with a single node. So let's run the following command. Minikube start driver VirtualBox, nodes 3, container runtime is container D, Kubernetes version 128.3, and the container network interface should be Calico. The recording was paused for several minutes, and now finally the larger cluster has been bootstrapped. We could run again the Minikube profile list. And we see that the available cluster is the default one, Minikube, on the VirtualBox driver. Container D runtime, version 128.3 in a running state with 3 nodes. We can also run the Minikube status command. It should show all 3 nodes in a running state. Minikube is the control plane node. It is labeled as such. Minikube M02, it is a worker node, and then Minikube M03 is the second worker node. And we can also explore the Minikube nodes list. probably there's a typo. Let's try Minikube node list. And there it is. The correct syntax lists the 3 Minikube nodes with their private IP addresses. We can verify the VirtualBox VM Manager, where it has the Minikube, Minikube M2, and Minikube M03 virtual machines all in running state. Now let's stop Minikube. This will stop all 3 nodes. So the VirtualBox Manager shows all 3 nodes powered off. We can check the status again. With all 3 nodes stopped. And for now we can leave this cluster offline until we are ready to do some work or to interact with the cluster. So this concludes our Minikube installation and cluster bootstrapping demo. We explored profiles, nodes, and different options to start a cluster with different drivers and different cluster sizes. Thank you very much for watching. Join me in a next video.